And welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels for Talking Europe on France 24. 80 million Europeans have a disability. That's 1 in 6 EU citizens. Now, people with disabilities are able to make a significant contribution to European society, but often they face obstacles that stop them from doing so. Now, some EU member states have removed the barriers that prevent disabled people from participating fully in the labour market. But for most, integration remains an uphill battle. I'm joined in the studio by Helga Stevens. Hello. You're a Belgian MEP from the N-VA, that's the Flemish Nationalist Party. You're one of a few EU members of the European Parliament who has a disability. You're deaf, and you're joined today by your interpreter, Ariane, who's sitting to my left. Also with us, Gunta Anca. You're from Latvia. You're the Vice President of the European Disability Forum. It's an independent NGO that represents the interests of Europeans with disabilities. I add that your platform is entirely run by persons with disabilities. Thank you very much to both of you for being with us today on France 24. Helga Stevens, I would like to start with you. Is the European Parliament a friendly place for MEPs, for lawmakers with disabilities? As a deaf lawmaker, do you believe that you have all the resources to put your message across?
Yes, absolutely. Parliament is very supportive in ways that I can network, and specifically as a deaf person, they provide sign language interpreters for all official meetings and for all official procedures. One problem is dialoguing with European Parliament about any meetings outside of Parliament that are also a function of my job, such as meetings with citizens, organizations, and other committees. These aren't official meetings, but they're still a part of European Parliament business. And I feel it is very important to provide sign language interpreters for those specific meetings as well. But for any correspondence with my colleagues, staff, I've had wonderful and full support and full communication, and I can't complain about any of the business that's being run here at Parliament.
Gunta Anca, as I said, you come from Latvia. You're based in Riga and Brussels. You know the situation across Europe. Are some countries doing better than others when it comes to integrate people with disabilities in the labour market?
Oh, you are asking a very difficult questions. And very difficult because you can never say one country is the best one and the other is the worst one. There are some very good things in some of the countries, and there are also quite bad things in the same countries. So to give you the name of the champion, I just can't. Of course,
Scandinavian nations are often hailed as good examples.
Maybe yes or maybe no also. If you are talking about Scandinavian countries, or the countries we are sometimes say with a welfare model or European welfare model, we are seeing that people with disabilities on those countries are some kind of objects where society should take care of them. So it means you should be happy in a very special places with very special rules provided very specially only for you, so for a person with disabilities. And sometimes I have a feeling that to be alive and to have an interesting and good life, it means not only to have everything done for you, but to have your own life where you can fight for your achievements, when you can get the things which are important not only by society providing you something special, but what is very important is that society should provide special kind of situation, special kind of support for people with disabilities. So people with disabilities can overcome disabilities. And then they can live a normal life in a normal society. And it means inclusion.
Inclusion. Well, Helga Stevens, I want to ask you a specific question. The European Union has ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Very concretely, what does this change? Is it a binding commitment?
Well, first thing that I need to explain is what the UNCRPD is, because we use this abbreviation for the UN Convention on the Rights for People with Disabilities, which also focuses on giving people with disabilities opportunities for inclusion in society. And now often people with disabilities are marginalized. They are segregated and put into special systems and institutions. We need to change from the medical perspective of disability to a social perspective, to a social model, which means that people with disabilities can be included in society, and society can be made to accommodate and include those with disabilities. The ratification of this convention is a very important step forward, but we also need to understand that the EU is not competent in all areas. The EU treaty gives power to the EU, but member states themselves clearly have to share competency. The EU can be included, in example, in education. Member states themselves have the responsibility of education, but when it comes to exchange programs, such as that of the Erasmus Plus program, the EU can then intervene. And disabled students will then have the right to move throughout European Union countries. And so that is one way that the UNCRPD Convention can intervene. It's an important step forward, but member states also need to do their part of the job. It's not only for the EU, it's a shared responsibility.
Absolutely. Now, we are France 24, so we wanted to find out more about the situation in France. Let's watch our report brought to us by Saskia Deville and Isabelle Romero.
Julian is 29 years old and suffers from narcolepsy. This rare disorder that causes periods of extreme daytime sleepiness has greatly affected his professional career. Today he speaks out, but has asked to remain anonymous.
The
last interview I had went really well. We spoke for 3 hours. The head of the company was there. And our conversation turned into a social debate. It was great. But when they learned that I was suffering from narcoleptic attacks, it was like, no way.
Julian is one of more than 400,000 disabled job seekers in France. This morning, he's attending a job fair. Under French law, a company with over 20 employees has the obligation to hire one disabled person.
I'm recognized as disabled by the RQTH initiative, if you're interested in hiring someone different.
Despite this initiative, which officially recognizes a person's status as a worker with a disability, prejudice is still deep-rooted.
I'm confident, and at the same time, I tell myself I don't have much to lose. I'm used to being rejected.
Today, 9.6 million people are considered as disabled in France. To ensure that their rights to equality and non-discrimination are guaranteed, a first law was voted in 1975 and then reinforced in 2005. Marc graduated with a degree in human resources. He's visually impaired and has been unemployed for 2 years.
When we present ourselves to employers, we, the people with a disability, are the ones that need to reassure them. They tend to question us more, so we need to show them that we deserve the job.
In 2011, the EU ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The treaty supersedes French laws, pushing France to have to make more progress in terms of equal opportunity.
The convention intends to protect the rights and dignity of people with disabilities. That's what everyone wants. But the problem is, how should we go about it? We're fighting on the political front to see that these laws will impact the lives of those with a disability.
In August, a group of UN experts will evaluate the practical implementation of the convention and the progress made by each European country.
Günther Anscha, as we saw in our report, and as Ms. Stevens said earlier, the UN, the EU, they can give frameworks, but it's up to the member states to implement policies. Now, under French law, a company with more than 20 employees has the obligation to hire one disabled person. The goal is to have 6% of disabled persons in the workforce. When you look at the figures, we're still far from it. People with disabilities only make up 3% of the workforce in French companies. Why is it so difficult to change attitudes?
You know, the attitude is the most difficult question in general, but it's very important that each country will think not only about quota system. It never works. You take a rules or you take a law and everybody will go and fill it in. It doesn't work, never. No, in France, and I know quota system doesn't work in Italy, doesn't work in many countries. There are countries in Europe where is quota system, there are countries in Europe where is no quota system. But situation of the unemployment for people with disabilities is still bad in all of them. And so it means quota system is not the only solution. It means there should be provided training for the employers. There should be provided training for those people who are working together with people with disabilities. There should be providing some kind of support or additional payment if the people are not able to work 8 hours per day, and a lot of different kinds of support.
Helga Stevens, do you agree that quotas haven't been successful?
Well, I believe that the numbers show and the statistics show that it doesn't really work all the time. The quotas in themselves can be a good step, one part of the solution, but they are not the solution in itself. It's a way to fill the gap, to come up from behind, but it's no long-term solution. It's not going to work because the statistics have already shown that. So we need to focus more on hiring someone because they're competent, not because they happen to have a disability. It's better to focus on the competencies and motivations and capabilities and benefits that can be derived from hiring a person with a disability within a business. For instance, people who suffer from autism can sometimes be great testers for software programs because of their intense focus. They're able to debug programs and such. This is an added value that comes from the fact that they have a disability. We need to focus on disability not as an inability, but as another form of competence. And I believe that more training and more information.
I'd like to hear more about your personal experience, because you served in the Flemish Parliament, in the Belgian Senate. You're now a very active lawmaker, member of the European Parliament here in Brussels. How would you explain that you managed to break this glass ceiling?
Well, that's a very good question, how I broke through that particular glass ceiling or that wall. It's very different for every person, actually. What I think is important, most important, is education at its base. I was mainstreamed in a regular school, and I started actually in a deaf school until I was 10 years old, and then I began a mainstream education. But mainstreaming doesn't mean just dropping a child into a school system. You have to offer support and services. And that is one of the points about mainstreaming that I think people think that it's just about putting a student into a mainstream environment, but there has to be support and accessibility provided for the child. In my experience, there were no interpreters when I was young. I was able to get through because of a lot of family support. But there are a lot of deaf children who really need interpreter support in their school systems, and that needs to be requested for them. It's very important. And in the employment situation as well, it's very important. For instance, the Flemish government also provides that type of support. If deaf individuals need an interpreter, they are provided with interpreters for free. And that is part of what I was talking about that is preferable to a quota system.
So Quota Hacha, we really focused on the employment situation, but the conclusion is that without proper training, children with disabilities won't make it. We really have to talk about training, and that's where a lot of efforts have to be made across Europe, I imagine.
Yes, of course, because the life of the person is living starts in a childhood. And as Helga just said, if you started in a mainstream schools, it means that those children who are together with you in the mainstream always will be ready in their lives to get somebody on your workplace, which maybe is deaf, because they know that together with her they don't have any kind of problems.
Helga Stevens, your conclusion, you were elected to the European Parliament in May last year. How do you hope to change the situation in the coming 5 years?
Well, my vision is I would like a barrier-free Europe at the end of my term. That's what I would love. And I would like to push Europe, the European Council, to propose as much accessibility on the agenda, because it is very needed, to level the field, because we are so behind compared with the United States. We should have no exclusion. If the USA can do it, then I'm certain that we can achieve the same goals. The disability movement has been going on for several years, and it is time for us to deliver politically.
Helga Stevens, Quota Hacha, thank you very much for taking part in this edition of Talking Europe. I also want to thank Arian for the interpretation in sign language. And thank you for watching the first part of Talking Europe. I will return just after the news break in about 10 minutes on France 24.